is 5:45. We call this Finance Advisory Committee meeting to order. Town of Aurora acknowledges recognition of the lands on which we live and work of the traditional and treaty territory and Chippewas and Virgin Islands, as well as many other nations whose presence continues to this day. As the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands. And as a municipality, we join with these responsibilities. Further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands and the municipalities of Chippewas recognized in Treaty 1913 as well as the Lands Treaty 1903. Shared understanding of the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past was where we are today will help us brought together into a better future. The motion to approve the agenda. Those husbands. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of primary interest? Seeing none. There's motion to receive the minutes from February 18th, 2025. Carol's. Michael. Any questions about the minutes? All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Delegations, we have 3 items. Point 1, this one's proposed water and wastewater rate strategy. Presentation. Indeed. Welcome. I see you're up there.
Right here?
Where?
I'm right here.
Oh, sure. Well, I saw you from there. I'm sorry. I'm have to say. I apologize.
Yeah, so we were here a little while ago.
Hold on. So why is the name up there too?
Oh, because I joined the Zoom meetings too, because earlier I was there.
You guys trying to trick me.
Yeah. So we were here before to discuss this and talk about other proposals. Sandy's going to provide an improvement.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to provide a summary of the analysis done by the finance team of the existing and the proposed water rate structure, wastewater rate structure. In 2024, we have presented to Council a fixed and a variable rate structure strategy as part of the public consultation meeting, which was followed by the detailed finance advisory committee review in May of 2024. The joint memo provides an overview of further analysis which is done by this staff of the impact of proposed rate structure on the average Aurora resident. In this presentation, we'll discuss the challenges of the existing rate structure along with the existing residential and the commercial consumption pattern, and which will help guide the finance advisory committee to proceed with one recommended rate structure. Next slide, please. So, next slide. The current rate structure, which is 100% variable, we have at present, Town of Aurora has 19,090 customers, and to them, the budgeted annual water consumption for our existing customer base, residents, is 5.5 million cubic meters, and the cost to be recovered from the sale of water and wastewater is budgeted for 2025 is 31.6 million. Next slide. The current rate structure, which is 100% volume benefit, which means that vacant homes and inactive customers do not pay for their fair share of the fixed infrastructure cost, because of which the active users end up sharing more burden, and it also does not encourage water conservation, and the revenues are 100% dependent on the level of consumption. So in the years, like for example, in 2024, which was a wet year, the revenue generated can be lower than the budgeted revenue projected due to the lower water consumption. The next slide provides an overview of our existing residential customer consumption pattern. It's a graphic view where we can see that out of the total 18,400 residential customers, majority of our customers consume less than 100 cubic meter per billing cycle, and the average customer consumption price for 50 cubic meter per billion water for the residential customers, and which represents majority of our town residents. For the next slide, for the commercial consumption pattern, slightly different than the residential customers, but we only have 600 commercial residents or customers, and they, out of the 600, 50% of our customers consume less than 100 cubic meter water per billing cycle, which is 5 months. Next slide. So this slide provides an overview of the proposed rate structure, which is a combination of a fixed and a variable rate structure, and which is consistent of a base charge and based on a meter size, which recovers the fixed cost associated with the contributions to the water and the wastewater reserve for future infrastructure replacement, and a volumetric, single-tier volumetric charge, which covers all the variable costs related to the bulk water purchase, overheads, and salaries and benefits. This is the key difference between the previously proposed rate structure in 2024. As in 2024, the variable rate structure included the cost of bulk water purchase along with the overhead and the salary costs, due to which the impact on the average resident customer was significantly higher than what we will see in the options proposed this year. So the fixed and a single volumetric charge rate structure does promote fairness. Now all town residents pay for their fair share of the fixed infrastructure costs, and it promotes fairness. The next slide, option 3. The proposed fixed rate structure is similar to what we saw in option 2, but a two-tiered volumetric rate charge is introduced. The two-tiered volumetric charge option considers the basic water needs of a household, providing the water at a lower rate for the first 50 cubic meter per billing cycle. Once an average consumption of 50 cubic meter per billing cycle is reached, a higher rate will be charged for any water usage in excess of the 50 cubic meters. A two-tier variable rate structure will encourage water conservation and provide some financial relief for basic water consumption needs. And the proposed two-tier rate structure have a minimal impact on the average rate paid bill for 2020 in any year. The next slide provides a graphic summary of the impact of current and a proposed rate structure on the average town resident bill. So for example, the vacant homes and the inactive customers whose consumption is 0 cubic meter will still be paying for their fair share of the fixed infrastructure costs. And whereas the average resident bill in option 2, which is a base charge and single tier volumetric charge, the bill will be $13 higher at $298 rather than $286. Whereas in option 3, which is fixed in a two-tier volumetric rate charge, where we give some rate to the residents, average residents, the impact on the average resident is nil. The two-tier rate structure does not promote 100% fairness. It definitely gives some break to the average resident. However, the impact on the customers is lower, which was a focus from 2024 to 2025. The next slide provides the impact on the high consumption customers of the proposed rate structures. So in both, for the high water consumption customers, they'll be happier now because if the proposed rate, any of the proposed rate structure is implemented, because they'll be seeing the savings generated through the fixed burden shifting to all the town, all the residents, to all the customers. And the next slide comes to the last slide of the presentation. Since the town May 1st, 2025 water and wastewater rates have already been approved, and it will take time to roll out the changes in the rate structure, therefore the first opportunity to introduce any of these new rate structure would be in May of 2027. And in the meantime, once the recommended rate structure is approved, staff will proceed with the validation of meter sizing information in our database with the help of STEAM for accurate building of the fixed rate structure to the town's residents, as well as the confirmation of the system implementation costs. We didn't proceed with getting the estimates yet. we'll wait for the direction. Finance advisor. That brings to the end. Thank you. Questions?
Actually, I got one question. I'll start. And I don't know if I missed it or not, but do we know the percentage of residents that are expected to see a savings versus those that are expected to see an increase?
Yeah, 2/3 will see an increase.
Yes.
Pardon?
2/3 will see an increase.
2/3. Okay, sorry, I missed it. Thank you. Question?
Actually, I'll let Harold start.
Harold.
I thought there was an illustration of what a typical household would have paid for the same, let's say, 50 cubic meters, let's say, currently or last year versus, let's say, if we moved it to, is that here or is that, I thought I saw it right.
Yes, on slide 9.
What was the price difference?
$13 and under option 2, where the average resident will be paying $13 higher under option 2. But if you want to give them a break and with minimal impact, then we switch to option 3, where there will be no impact on the average residents, which is 50% of our entire count residents.
Sounds time-wise like last year, but that's relevant. It's like thinking like the difference is not as dramatic as I thought it would be because I think you mentioned this that the higher volume users they kind of save a little bit because more people are paying into the fixed costs, and on the other side, balance it out because if you're not using as much, then you save there. So it kind of moderates everything.
Also, the fixed cost only includes the contributions to the reserves, the future asset replacement cost. So the split between the overall, if the overall cost is $100, the fixed cost is only 30% of the overall water cost.
So in terms of, I mean, I like the idea of promoting water conservation. I always get a cringe when I see someone watering their lawn in July, August, and the end of the day, all of the waste of water that they're paying for. But because I don't see a huge jump in the rate, if you're like you only receive a huge jump if you're like an institution that's using a lot of water. Is there a way to have these tiers for like households, maybe this average household here for imagine this is a very narrow band. Is there a way that we can kind of have that increase be more substantial so that people are mindful? And we would put in a ballot in case you know have as much communication out there so that people are aware. So I guess my question is, what are staff's thoughts on having a more dramatic increase, like within the typical household usage? Because from 30 square cubic meters to 50, like when you have 10,000 households or whatever, that could be a lot of water being saved. Is that being considered, or is that even an option?
Yes, we can consider that. That will be another tier. Like right now, we have 2-tiered volumetric charge.
One of the other things we've done as part of the broader analysis is we've looked at different types of customers. So we've looked at customers where it might be just a 2-person household versus a household that looks to be more like a family type usage. And then we've also looked at properties that we know have irrigation systems or pools to see what the various usage is. And one of the reasons with the 2-tier is it considers that basic use of water with that lower rate up to 50 cubic meters. Because the research and the information we got from DFA indicated that's kind of the on average the basic use the family would need to for use of water over a 3-month period.
But sorry, we could definitely play that second tier rate, set it higher to encourage water consumption through a higher rate. So we can play that second tier. That's the benefit of having two variable rates. Is you have that first tier rate covers on basic consumption, it's a little bit less price. Then you have the higher rate, which gives all that basic consumption. That's where you kind of bring conservation of water piece.
Yeah, for those who are just using basic water, at least people who complain about their water bills and actually save there and is compensated by.
Yeah, and the big advantage of the fixed rate component of this is it makes sure that everybody pays their fair share of the fixed costs of receiving water. Up to this juncture, ultimately, 100% variable rate results in higher consumers paying all the fixed costs, with the majority of the fixed costs, the lower consumers not paying their share of the fixed costs, us providing that network to them. So this fixed charge allows a fair, equitable distribution of those fixed costs across all water payers. And then your costs and coach the meeting water, their costs.
And that includes any big calls with sewer usage, or actually have to start paying for water usage, for the water use costs.
You my last question is, I was surprised when under institutional or commercial use, seniors homes are listed. So I guess they get billed as one entity as opposed to each resident that lives there. So I thought it seems kind of unfair that these residents would have to pay more, even though they're kind of individuals and we're charging them collectively. Is there any way around that for our senior homes? We have quite a few.
Yes, we can look into that. We'll be consulting the township of Cape as well. It's just the management of the system implementation we do have, but we can look into further discuss.
And even at this point, with two options for those, with the single variable rate and two-tier rate, those would be in that higher consumption in commercial, and we see that in all instances, they're going to be less. Just right now, they're taking a lot higher burden of the asset management costs for the entire network, because it's all based on the volumetric charge improvement. So they will actually be seeing a break through this.
Okay, that's great. I have no further questions. It seems like for me, option 3 is kind of maybe towards.
Thank you. Through you to Rachel. But first off, how many inactive customers in Vacant Homes do we have? Okay.
She'll look it up.
Just because, we talked about the fact that we have 19,000 customer accounts. And I just want to know what percentage of that is the inactive and vacant reasons in part driving our decision to alter the structures. It's good information to have. I certainly, agree with the principle of trying to promote fairness and making sure that everybody pays their fair share. And so that's why I'd like to know that more. I struggle a little bit more with water conservation piece. So when I look at be it the variable or the two-tier, those that are at the lower end of usage end up paying more. So I'm still struggling to see how we're making the argument that the current proposals, option 2 or option 3, actually promote water conservation when the lower end people end up paying more than they did previously. So they're not necessarily being rewarded for being smaller users of water, be it 25 cubic meters. Their average bill is higher. So how do we explain that to the residents and say, thank you for your water conservation, your bill's higher?
Yeah, so the main component of that is the fixed charge. So right now, those low users and low consumption, they're not paying as much into that asset management cost of being able to actually ensure that water can be delivered to their house, so they're not paid into the network, whereas the high consumption users are the ones that are paying for that asset management cost. So to more fairly distribute that across the network, we're looking at meter size. For the actual consumption portion of it, that price is going to drop, the variable cost, and because they are lower users on a variable, they're not going to get that second tier, so they're not going to get that second tier charge. But yes, the ones that are, possibly away for 6 months, like in snowbirds or something like that, they're going to still get a bill during winter months when they're not there because they're going to be paying for that infrastructure price.
And I think that, for us in this room, we have a deeper understanding of why we're doing this, the challenges with maintaining, repair, and replacement of this infrastructure, our obligations around the Clean Water Act. But I guess for the average resident, they're just going to see higher costs of the and I think that some thought needs to be put around communication strategy and what we're doing. Years ago we put together videos when it came to regards to property taxes, how it all works. Maybe we need to revisit that and look at, doing one on water and wastewater, why we're making these changes, how the costs are done. Because I think that, we all know that it's fairly complex subject matter when it comes to the fact that we buy region, but there's infrastructure costs and everything else. So I think there's going to be a communication piece around this. We're going to change the basic requirement.
And for the number of inactive customers, 811. They're not getting bills for water.
So that would include vacant homes.
Yes.
811 and 19,000.
Yeah.
And I think it was addressed in your final comments, Sandeep, but again, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's just in terms of meter sizes, are we going to put some numbers around that? Because when we talk about the annual meter charge, I'm curious to know, how many customer homes fall under meter sizes less than 1.5 versus 2 versus 36.
So most of the residential are all in that first group. So that's almost all the meters as well, right?
Yes, most of the residential customers, I would say 99.67% of our residential customers are below 1 inch meter size.
It's about validating the size of the commercial ones.
Sure. No, that's good to know. The other point I had is that, so we're talking about implementing this May 1st, 2027. So is there time between now and when council needs to adopt this in December 2026 to go back out to the public and have it up and done in the public house and say, listen, these were the options, like to engage the residents, to be able to solicit their feedback on the two options. What would you like to see? What would you prefer? And sort of just capture that information and bring it back to council as a whole in terms of their ability to weigh in.
That's a good way to do this. Is there any way to Mike's point that maybe we could add something into water bill, future water bill that explains it, and also maybe shows that your bill would be this under the new structure of this option? Is there any way to do that? I know that might be a little more work, but
The calculation part is a bit more challenging because it actually has to make system configuration changes to be able to do that.
okay.
We can definitely work with communications and like communication strategy and possibly even go out before this is necessary, because we do need time. What we're looking for at this point in time is feedback from FAC as to like which type of option do you want to start, like how to start pursuing and recommend moving forward with, and then we can look at how we do those communications, how we gather more feedback from people.
Yeah, I just think that, we have the time, so let's engage and let's include that in part of the decision making. And so going back to meter size, how did we determine what the annual meter charge should be? So for example, the $111 for those meter sizes up front.
So for that, we did consider the total fixed cost which gets contributed towards the asset replacement, annual cash and capital contribution, and to look at the total number of meters we have, and then compare with the American Association of Meter ratios, and then we split the overall cost based on that.
Just straightforward calculation.
Yes.
It's based on capacity.
Sure.
So it's a weighted distribution.
And the repair and replacement. Okay. So that's all the questions I have.
Thanks. Recommendation.
I'm leaning towards option three.
Could we not go to the public and provide both options though? I think there's a tremendous amount of work done on the two. Don't know if we.
Yeah, we can work with
Do we need
communications.
to at this point in time to make a steer in one direction or not, given that we got a year and a half?
Were you looking for specific?
I know there's a preference that way, and I mean, that's what I'm asking, does it have to?
Yeah, at least if we're, with the understanding, yes, we do want to move forward with some sort of base cost plus variable cost. We can do that work and start looking at investigating costs for estimating changes, also start investigating meters, but then also do that communication strategy as well, reaching out to people. Or you can work with our communications team to get some feedback and figure out the best way to engage.
So just need you to move it.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed, that carries. Next, is the annual investment policy.
So as part of our annual review, we need to take a look at the investment policy, and this is also required under the Joint Investment Board. There are some administrative changes in here, so as mentioned before, for our joint investment, for prudent investments, we've, under the board, they've moved to an outsourced investment officer model, so the changes, some administrative changes deal with that. We also had a discussion in previousness that we see about alternative investments, which we investments in infrastructure. The feedback was not at this time, let's wait and see. So our policy does specifically state that on page
47 to 63 or page 18 of the policy.
yeah, so that is included in here. And then the other piece is the addition of defining what restricted special assets are. So these are investments that we have moved over to prudent that were in longer term GICs or PPNs or investments of those sort that we didn't cash out because we didn't want to take losses on. So they're classifying them as a different group. They're still considered money, it's not required immediately, but the JIT is not, and it doesn't have the ability to manage these, so they're just and basically these changes are just to allow for those things.
Questions?
I thought more or less it was fine. I think a couple of questions that came up was in the overview, it talks about section 418 legislation under for MRI. It says cannot be invested outside the legal list, and then 14.1 even. So I was a little confused, but for the short term, are we allowed to? I suspect we are because. Are we allowed to invest in anything outside the legal list for the short term?
So the MRIs, basically the net monies that are under the town's management. So because that's under the town's management, we are restricted to the legal list. So that's the funds we need in the short term, about 18 to 24 months. So we look at what our needs are over the next 18 to 24 months, and we keep those cash on hand, and we'll invest them in one of those investments. Like we have some GICs, but he says we have the option of the one equity fund or one bond fund. They're fairly liquid investments as well, so we need the funds, they're available. It's only the money's not required immediately, which is outside of that time frame, which is with a prudent investor, with a JIT, they can more broadly invest on that path.
So in the short term, we can invest in short-term bond fund.
There's a one investment bond fund, and it's all Canadian content, so that's what we're looking at.
And related to that, I was kind of curious as to what the definition of an MRI versus the longer term MRNI or whatever. at first I thought it was under 3 months, but section 3.1 seems to indicate like 2 years. So
We
that's
defined it as 2 years just for the management of the GICs or the high interest savings account. So investments that have a maturity date of less than 2 years, we look at as monies required immediately. With anything that is beyond that time frame, it's considered money not required immediately, which is for the most part underneath the one JIB for their management.
And a lot of it is about planning for capital needs as well. So our capital plan informs what monies we need to have available to be able to spend throughout the year.
seems okay. I think my one last column was I think it was on page 19 or 21, the benchmarks. It's kind of generic about what they're going to compare the performance on. It's kind of generic, but I would imagine the joint investment board personnel would ensure that the portfolio managers are applying the right benchmark, because you have a low benchmark or something that's kind of has a low bar, then it's not really a fair challenge or comparison to what they're investing in. That's for now. I'm happy with changes that I see.
Second. All in favor? Opposed, that carries. Last, we have financial management services regarding financial risk assessment, possible use tariff.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, this is a bit of a moving target. Things change from day to day. So this is at a point in time, it was about what, a week or so ago, what we knew, and then everything changed the next day. So this is obviously steel information now, but it just gives you a bit of insight to where some of our potential exposure could be.
I have a question, not so much on the expenses and anything. There's quite a challenge these days to say a profit business what we target, but it all highlights our backwards. But in our budget, we allocate, we identify investments, our operating budget. And so, I didn't really want to bring up the last one, but I thought more relevant to this conversation is, given the state of all that's happening, what is the outlook for our investments? And do we see this have an impact on the revenue that we not rely on, but collect as part of our investments and utilize it?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so in the short term, yes, it's going to have an impact, but a lot of our more riskier investments, US investments and equity investments, are all sitting with prudent investors in the chip. Those are intended to be invested over a longer period of time. So at this point in time, it would not be good to be divesting the money that we have in the chip.
I'm more talking about the yields than the actual individual ones, because the yields to be able to allocate funds one way or another.
Yeah, so in the short term, the yields will be down, but we expect over the longer term, on average, we'll do much better. And I believe in the JIB, we were looking at 16.9% since inception. Somewhere around 15%.
Yes.
14.9.
So that $1.6 million is
So that's a different conversation about that $1.6 million, because really what that's doing is it's taking the investments they have in reserves, and it means that we need to invest more money into our reserves from contributions to capital. So that's something that we'll be dealing with at some point.
Right, so this moving target, I think today in the front speech it was announced that I think they're bringing legislation tomorrow. They're going to be enacting, talking about 94 governments looking at breaking down the barriers between interprovincial trade. So that could change some aspects of what we're doing. I think for good, but it's going to be a change. So we'll see what that legislation looks like tomorrow, I guess. But yeah, absolutely targeted. I know staff are constantly working on this, so thanks for all the work you guys are doing.
The US government was pretty quiet today, so who knows what's gonna happen tomorrow.
Surprisingly quiet today, yes.
One interesting one is I know on JCC, a lot of the fire infrastructure, the trucks, everything, equipment comes from the United States, so I don't know if they,
So to that point, I heard that there is a place in Canada that does actually sell this.
Yeah.
Well, for town, ordered for computers and fleet equipment, we've actually been able to try and get it ahead of some of these tariffs. So many of our computers that we were planning on refreshing this year, we ordered them and we got them in stock. So now we're just working through it because we wanted to get them before the tariffs would come in. Because we didn't know if it was going to impact us in any way or not. So erred on the side of certainty.
trying to lunch there.
The other big one seems to be building materials, something like, what's the stat? %25% of building materials come from the US. And we basically have double, the Canadian tariff on stuff coming in, plus a lot of inputs to use building materials, actually Canadian inputs, which get tariffed on over. So that I think there's a lot of price sensitivity around building materials. We probably want to delay any big construction projects if we have any coming up, if that's reasonable to do so.
So what you're saying is housing is going to slow down even more.
Well, it'll impact the cost of housing. Yeah.
We know in hindsight now that if that had waited, the cost would have escalated significantly. Again, to your point, I think not just us or other municipalities looking at big projects, they gotta give some consideration to, what may or may not be the impact for sure.
Anything else? Carol's moved. Michael second.
Yeah.
All those in favor? All set carries. New business, Harold? Motion to adjourn. Michael, Harold, all those in favor? Opposed?